Hello and welcome to the Risky Business Podcast. I'm Sam Stone. I'm sitting down with people who I have seen take big risks in their life. My goal is to encourage you, challenge you, and push you to take a risk, whatever that may be in your life. Risky business. Let's get risky. Here we go.
Put in work, I got so much potential, it hurts. If y'all do not wake up, then y'all
All right, welcome to the Risky Business Podcast. We are here. I'm honored to sit down with Governor Matt Bevin, the 62nd governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. But prior to that, lots of accolades that come before it. So thank you so much for sitting down. And I'm honored just to get to have the audience hear from someone who I've personally seen take large risk and see the way that it pans out. So thanks for sitting down.
Happy to do it. Yeah, looking forward to our conversation.
We weren't even rolling yet, and we just had 5-minute conversation on the history of the Ohio River and the locks, and the only president to get a patent who was...
Yeah, it was Abraham Lincoln, actually. He was the only president ever to be issued a patent, and it was associated with locks and with, bypassing areas like the Falls of the Ohio here in Louisville, Kentucky. So a lot of history in this town.
And you said the 5th largest. Would you say that stat again?
Yeah, I think in about the time of the Civil War, Louisville by population was the 5th largest city in America, in large measure because of the Falls of the Ohio and the fact, and again, you talk about what it takes, risky business. I mean, when people moved west, when people came through the Cumberland Gap, at the time, Appalachia was really the kind of western frontier. Those mountains, what was on the other side, the peoples, the animals, the frontier, the unknown woodlands on the other side of those mountains kept most everybody on the East Coast. But when guys like, I guess it was Daniel Boone, most famously, pioneered their way up through the Cumberland Gap, came into Kentucky, which incidentally, you're probably familiar with this, but Daniel Boone, upon making his way up into this area where you and I sit today, said, as he looked around, he said, surely, heaven must be a Kentucky kind of place.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
So, we are blessed to live in a state like Kentucky and in this part of America, the greatest nation on earth. And it has always afforded people the chance to take risk and be rewarded for it, whether they were pioneering to the west, and that's part of, again, why Ohio, the Ohio River Valley became so populous early on, was because of the river and the Falls of the Ohio and people stopping there, and then the industry that built up around that. When people had to stop, take all the stuff off their ships, their boats, port it around the falls, get it back on new barges and things, and continue down the river toward the Mississippi and then down toward the Gulf. It created an opportunity for people to take risk in this town, and Louisville kind of sprung up because of it.
That's so interesting. And I know you're not from Louisville.
I'm not.
But
no.
I was reading and trying to do my podcast.
Not originally, and so you don't ever get to claim from being from here unless you were born here.
No, I'm just meaning I was reading, and when you came to Fort Knox in the Army, and you said, hey, if I end up having a family one day, I want to raise them in a place like this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world. I grew up in northern New Hampshire. I was actually born in Denver, Colorado. I was the third of what ultimately became 6 children. The first 3 of us were born in Colorado. The last 3 were born in New Hampshire, which is where I grew up. So when I was little in the late 60s, my parents moved up to northern New Hampshire, the northernmost county of New Hampshire, just a little south of the Canadian border, and in a little town of 200 people.
Really?
With no stoplight, no gas station, no stores, no schools, no anything. I mean, there was nothing in that town. We shared a zip code.
A town of 200 people, and your family was how many?
Actually, it's interesting. In the 1970 census, there were 198 people in the town. At that point, we were 6 of them. So we were 3% of the town's population, I guess, technically.
When somebody was running for a position there, they were stopping.
There was nobody running for position. Everybody, it was like, who's going to volunteer? It was people like Tommy Hayes, because he owned a backhoe.
Yeah.
So that means Tommy was the town cop. He took care of the dump. He helped people get out of ditches. He plowed the road. He just, whatever. He and his uncle Roland Hayes, and it was just people. It was a little town. It was a big township. There was about 4 to 4.5 people per square mile in the town, so it wasn't very populated, but a great place to be from, in the kind of place that affords people the kind of mindset to take risk, which is to the heart of really what you're talking about with this whole podcast.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about you growing up. Who was Matt Bevin growing up? Obviously, moved around from Colorado to New Hampshire.
Yeah. I didn't have a lot of decision making involved in that. I was along for the ride at that stage in my life. But growing up in northern New Hampshire in a very rural environment, pretty much everything we ate or grew, everything we ate, we either grew it or raised it ourselves. We bought stuff from the store too. It wasn't like we were pioneers, but I was closer to a 19th century existence than most people you'll likely meet in this country. Very kind of a rural environment. I shared a bedroom with my 3 brothers that was about the size of this little studio we're in right here. All 4 of us in that room. And you didn't really appreciate how small that was until I saw it years later and was shocked. And I was thinking, man, I remember we each had our own bed in the corner, and it seemed like we had a lot of space. But then as I remembered back, I could touch every other bed without leaving my own bed. So I guess in hindsight, as I thought about it, I might have had to stretch a little. But I realized,
privacy wasn't a thing.
No, space was not a premium, but it was good. It was an unheated house. We had no central heat. We had 2 little wood stoves. They'd go out every night. So we had no central heat. We never had a shower growing up, never had a TV. It was just a very rural, Spartan existence. Spent a lot of time running around outside, a lot of time working. It encouraged risk-taking because my parents, my dad worked a lot of different jobs, worked primarily during my life in a dowel mill in western Maine, just over the Maine-New Hampshire border from where we lived. And for me, if I wanted money, we never got an allowance or anything. So if I wanted money, my parents were like, okay, you got to figure out how to get it. If you have to convince a neighbor to pay you something. Yeah. And so I would do little like weeding chores or something for one neighbor, but he didn't pay very well. And
he was always late.
sometimes he didn't even pay. I mean, it was like he would like tell you, thanks, I'll get you next time. And then you're a little kid, you have time to burn, but it didn't take long before you realized that, I won't even say his name, Mr. So-and-so was kind of a little bit tight with the money. So it sounds like I got to come up with a way to make money.
You were learning business ventures quick.
I was.
You don't go back and do your second job until you get paid for the first.
Exactly. You learn a lot. And the key is, and really what I would tell your listeners, take chance early. Encourage your children to take chances early. Fail early. Fail early and often. Because there's nobody who makes it all the way up the food chain who hasn't had failures along the way. And when I was 6, again, I lived in this rural environment. Nobody really needed to buy seeds, for example. But everybody did buy seeds, but they would buy them in bulk from companies like Burpee and other companies like that. Well, I decided, okay, I'm going to sell seeds. I'm going to buy them in bulk. I got like, $5, $10, $15, $20 maybe on a really good Christmas birthday combo. My birthday's in January. So kind of I'd end up with about $20 or so, that parents or that grandparents and aunts and uncles would give me. So I took that money, I bought bulk seeds, and then I sold them in packets to people. And when a little kid, it started when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, I was doing this. And when a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid bikes a mile or 2 miles down a dirt road to come to your house to sell you a 25-cent packet of seeds, you're probably going to buy a packet of seeds. But I'll tell you this, Sam, you learn powerful, powerful lessons too. Who do you think I wanted to answer that door when I was a 7-year-old kid knocking on a door? I'd just driven a half a mile down the road. Do you think I wanted the man of the house or the woman of the house? 100%. 100%. I didn't fully appreciate that at first. Yeah. Took me about 2 or 3 houses to realize I wanted the woman of the house to answer the door, not the man of the house. And I literally
act like you're really out of breath when you get up there.
I didn't even need to. A little kid hoofs his way down, and it's funny. I literally found myself. I'd like, oh, Mr. So-and-so's home. Okay, I'm not going to call there today. I'll wait till he's gone. I mean, because the thing is, a dude has no problem saying, yeah, kid, no, I'm good on seeds, don't need anything. But women are more kind. They're more loving. They're like, oh, this little kid made this effort. And so I would sell vegetable seeds and I would sell flower seeds. Now, what do you suppose? Once I figured out usually the women were the ones buying, what do you think they bought more often?
Oh, probably the woman bought the flowers.
They bought flower seeds more often because none of them needed the seeds, let's be honest. But they'd be like, okay, well, I guess I could use some more marigolds or something. So they'd buy a packet of flower seeds. So how long do you think it took me before I realized, okay, if they're going to pay 25 cents for a packet of vegetable seeds or flower seeds, you'd probably pay 30 cents for the flower seeds because it's a premium product.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't really. It didn't cost me any more for that flower seed.
Funny.
But all of a sudden, I had made 100% increase in my profit because I had a 5-cent profit in my vegetable seeds.
Wow.
Out of 25 cents, 5 cents of it was profit. And then I made 10 cents on the vegetable seeds, on the flower seeds, I should say. So it literally, in very short measure, within a couple, before I was 7, 8 years old, certainly before I was 8, I'd figured all this stuff out about how to sell, who to sell to, what it was like to be rejected, what it was like to have somebody say no to you, and then figure out, okay, how do you mitigate that risk by finding a way to get to the person who will say yes? And then what are the things you have to do to make that person say it? What kind of value proposition do you have to make? Because you get a certain premium from being a cute little kid.
Yeah.
That's worth something. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a value proposition, I wasn't going to just show up at their door, be a cute little kid and say, hey, can I have some money? I had to give them something of value. And so then the problem with seeds, though, in the Northeast is it's very short season. There's only a short little window in which people want them. And so I was like, I need to get another thing to make money. So I'd already gotten used to riding my bike miles and going to see these people. So I decided I would sell greeting cards. And my older brother, is 2 years older than me, said, dude, how are you going to make money? I said, well, I'll buy the cards and I'll sell them at a slight markup. Because here's the thing, you're going to buy them from the same people that these other people could buy their own cards. So where's the value? I said, well, I can bring them to the door. Then I started thinking about it. I was like, that's a good point. So I got to find a way to build some value into this. So I went out and bought like 8 different sets of cards. And, you get like 10 snowmen, 10 wreaths, 10 wise men, 10 manger scenes, 10 Christmas trees, whatever. And they're, 10 cardinals. They're all different, but they're all the same in there. You get 10 of the same one or 12 or whatever they came in. And what I decided to do is I was going to make mixed sets. That was going to be my value prop.
The value pack.
So when people, I would say, hey, are you interested in buying some Christmas cards? And I'd be selling these during the summer, in the fall, like literally. Like they'd be like, well, I'm probably all good. I'm like, are you sure? Because if you get them now, a lot of times people wait till the last minute, then the good ones are gone. I was trying to hustle my little story.
At age 7.
And literally, like at 8, it was 7 and 8 when I started the cards and did that. I did all this for a couple years after that. But anyway, starting when I was 11, I got hourly jobs where I could just work for people for hourly wages. But that's a whole nother story. But anyway, at first people would say, no, we're good with cards. And I'd say, well, what kind of cards do you normally give? Well, we give like manger scenes or something. I'd say, well, does everybody you send it to want a manger scene? Well, no, but but that's what they all are. They all come with a manger scene. I said, do you have some people that would probably like a wreath or maybe some wise men or snowmen or something? They well, probably, yeah, it'd be nice to mix up, but they don't come that way. I said, well, what if they did? Literally, I was like this, the little hustler. I was like, what if they did? Like, well, I don't know how that works. Well, here's what I would show them what I've created. And they would just...
You're the reason they put on the packet, do not separate and resale.
Yeah, really.
Later down the road.
Probably because of kids like me who undermine their whole business proposition. But it was funny because they were, I look back on it, they were probably somewhat amused. Like, this kid is just working it. Like I'll buy, $4 worth of cards or something from this kid, whatever I sold them for. I don't even remember. But
that's so funny.
But it was funny. Yeah. So that was how I started. And again, took risk by taking the money that I had gotten that wasn't in the form of McDonald's gift certificates. Because basically the only thing I always got McDonald's gift certificates and a little bit of cash from relatives who were away. And took the cash and just redeployed it and created the opportunity to make a little more. And interestingly, was able to send myself to camp.
Really?
When I was 7 and 8 years old, I went to a little Christian camp. There was a week-long camp away from home, and I loved it. I was 7 years old the first year. I went 8 years the second year. I paid 100% of it myself. It was only $50.
Wow.
For a week away. $50.
Yeah, but when you're on 5-cent margins, 50.
But yeah, it took me a long time because I had my 20 and I'd turn it into $40-$50 over the course of the summer. And so anyway, it's good.
As I was doing some research, I was going, because originally I was like, I had heard a clip from you just talking about, you mentioned there's a misogi principle in the Japanese culture. And that's what kind of started this whole podcast of taking risk of what's something in your life that you feel like there's a less than 50% success rate. And have you taken a chance to try to achieve something this year? And the Japanese culture, they try to do something like that every year. If what's something that I feel like I can't succeed at, that's what I'm going to try to achieve this year. And on the backside of it, when you succeed at that, the sense of accomplishment that you get when you succeed at something was less than 50% is so much greater. And so I listened to a clip from you. I can't remember when it was probably when you were governor. And it was just saying you kind of looked at everything in the future as, it was about a 50-50 shot of me winning governorship or whatever it was. And I look back at the numbers, and there's been 2,000 governors in America in the history of our country, and 600 million people. And so obviously there's been a lot of people who've decided to run for governor and to lead a Commonwealth or lead a state. And there's very few people who've succeeded at that. So where did you feel like that thought process came from you of, you know what, I'm just crazy enough to think that I actually could be governor one day and lead a state?
It's interesting, Sam. I didn't really think about, I never took a political science course in my life. I
saw you studied East Asian studies in college?
Speaking of which, you mentioned the misogi kind of concept coming from Japan. So in the 1980s, I was in college at Washington and Lee University in Virginia. I was studying business economics. I was interested in the business world. But in the 1980s, there was the rise of Japan. You know, the rapid growth era coming out of the 50s and 60s of Japan really led to this explosiveness in the 70s and the 80s. The Japanese economy burst onto the global scene and had extraordinary success. And the Japanese were buying all sorts of things in America. They bought Pebble Beach. You know, they bought half the buildings in Manhattan. They seemed to be buying everything in between. And everybody said, my goodness, we're all going to be working for the Japanese someday. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. If we're all going to end up working for the Japanese, I want to know what they're talking about. So to your point, in terms of taking risk, I literally I switched my major from business to East Asian studies, went over to Japan, moved in with a Japanese family, immersed myself in the culture, learned the language, went to a university there. I only did it for about 7 months, but it just completely, I'd never traveled anywhere outside the country. I just went and did it.
This was during college?
Yeah, I was 21 years old, and just said, you know what, I'm just going to go do it and see what they're talking about. And learning the culture, learning the religion, learning the history, learning the language, learning everything that made the Japanese mindset what it was, so that I could understand the literal difference, not just the figurative difference between East and West, because the Eastern mindset and the Western mindset are very different. We talk about risk in this country. We are blessed to live in America where risk is sort of inherent. The people who founded this country took great risk to get here. You know, they left more stability behind in some cases. Other cases, they fled because of persecution or whatever, but they came to a very risky place, taking great risk in order to succeed. We take for granted how normal it is to take risk here. Like, we want our kids to take chances and be their own little person. In Japan, there's a saying, derukugi wa utereru, which means the nail that sticks up will be hammered down. That is a non-risk-taking culture. And yet, how did they become this massive player on the global stage? It was by taking things and improving upon them, this constant improvement. Not only what are you going to do this year that's great, but this Kaizen kind of concept of constant, continuous improvement. And so for me, the greatest gift you can give yourself or the greatest asset potentially that you could have if you want to be somebody successful in business, and we can come back to the political thing here, is be willing to take risk, be intellectually curious. Intellectually curious people read a lot, they experience new things, they step out of their comfort zone. The wonderful thing for me growing up as I did, I never, ever was afraid to have nothing. Because, I mean, again, I say this with all respect for my dad, loved my dad, was grateful to have been raised by two parents who poured into us the best they could. But I'm fairly confident my dad never made $20,000 a year in his life and raised a family of 8.
Wow.
You know, and that's, you know, so I spent a lot of my youth being embarrassed by $100 rusted out mufflerless cars that we drove around in and things like that. But as my dad would always say, it's character building. And it made me willing to take chances, willing to do things that other people were afraid of. And again, most of your folks will listen to this, but if it's able to be seen, people could look at me now. I've never been, and I'm at 50, I just turned 58. I'm a 58-year-old version of what I was when I was a young man. I was never the tallest guy, never the best looking guy, never the richest guy, never the most connected guy, never the smartest guy. I was never the anythingest guy per se, but I've been blessed to have a lot more success than the average person, primarily because one thing that I did do more than the average person was take chances, because I wasn't afraid to lose everything. And that's the greatest thing I could impart to your listeners is don't be afraid to end up with nothing. You can live with nothing. Nothing isn't desirable. I knew growing up the way I grew up that I didn't aspire to have nothing. I didn't aspire to live like I was living when I grew up. I was aspiring to do something other than that. But I wasn't afraid of that. And so I was always willing to just go all in on things. And when other people who were way more qualified, way more connected, way more resources, were sitting on the sidelines afraid, I don't know, the odds are this, the odds are that, I would just be like, I'm going for it. And so the more competent people are sitting on the edge of the hugging the tree trunk, I'm tiptoeing right out on that branch. And it's funny, there's not as much competition out there. And ironically, some of it's not that good because some of the people out there are just crazy. They'll take any risk. It's not even calculated risk. So I think the thing is, back to your question about the political front, I'd never volunteered on a campaign. I'd never even had a bumper sticker on any vehicle I owned until I ran for office, and I felt bad, like I'm asking people to put bumper stickers on. I should put one of my own on. But, it was one of these things where, for me, I ran not because I wanted to be governor, but because I was willing to be. There were things that we needed to do. And the point of this isn't to talk about politics, but there were things in this state that needed to get done that had been punted and punted and punted for decades. And everybody had said, well, those will never get done. We only had 44 out of 100 seats in the legislature. I ran as a Republican. I'm only the fourth Republican in 100 years to be elected governor of Kentucky. People think we're this deep red state. Nonsense. I mean, 4 governors in 100 years that are Republican, and we only had 44 out of 100 seats in the House. So how are you going to get that done? How are you going to get all these things done? But I said, listen, I'm going to run on all these issues, and if people want someone to address them, they'll vote for me. And if they don't, then they won't. Whoop-de-doo. I don't. If you allow your entire sense of self-worth to be defined by what people think of you or whether you're successful in any single venture, you're going to live a life of great disappointment. But if you live with a sense of purpose and conviction, you know why you're doing it. You're doing things because you're willing to, not necessarily because you want to. The mindset that gives you, the sense of purpose and passion and directness, it's hard to quantify. It affords you tremendous ability to make things happen. It really does.
That last just 3 minutes, there were so many things that I wanted to even highlight in my brain to make sure we go back to, because you just said so many things that I feel like, as I'm turning 30 in a couple months, and as I sit and talk to people who are my age, I hear so many times, well, okay, that guy was born on the 40-yard line, or that guy's born on second base, and people look at people who have either been born to money or born to influence or born in a family that's this or that, and you say, okay, well, yeah, but your mindset behind it is so different from anybody I've ever heard of saying, yeah, that's great. That person might have been born on second base. I was born on home plate, but I was swinging for the fences because I had nothing to lose. And I think that's the mindset
that's what built this country, Sam. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of thing that has made America the beacon in the world that it is a whole bunch of people like me, just scrappers, just getting out there and making it happen. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. It's the blessing of adversity. It really is. It's the blessing of adversity. If you have it too good, what's your incentive to take a chance? What's your incentive to take risk? What's your incentive to put things at risk with the potential of losing them? Though for me, it didn't bother me to put things at risk, because the worst that happened is I lost everything and I went back to nothing. But I'd spent half my life with nothing, so I knew that while I didn't, as I said earlier, aspire to it, I wasn't afraid of it. You can live with nothing for a period of time. You really can. Nothing in America is a whole lot for most of the people in the world. Let's be honest. And so for me, one thing I would say, though, to your listeners, especially if you don't have a lot, and even if you do, I'm looking over your shoulder, and people can't see it, but on the wall there's a poster that says "Be kind." And boy, that's a powerful statement right there. Be kind. Number one. Number two, keep a positive balance in the favor bank. And what I mean by that is always be doing for other people, anytime, every time, in little ways and in big ways, without any expectation of being paid back. Do favors for people where you know there's no chance you could be paid back, but always be putting deposits in the favor bank, because the day will come when you will need to make a withdrawal. And you may need to make a withdrawal from somebody with whom you've personally made deposits, or it might be somebody you've never made a deposit with, but you want in good conscience to be able to go to that bank and withdraw a favor and gratefully take it and run with it. And I think too many people are just looking for the easy path. It doesn't come easy. No business comes easy. Failure is inevitable if you're going to really be taking chances. And I have had many businesses along the way. I mean, time probably doesn't afford us the ability. We could talk for hours about all the different business ventures. I don't tend to use LinkedIn a whole lot, but if you looked at LinkedIn, it has my title as free range chicken. I don't know if you even noticed that.
I didn't see that. No.
That's really what I am. I'm sort of a free range chicken. And
I
always
noticed
have
that
been.
when I was starting to look up things that you had done. I was like, man, it seemed like everything was just. I know your family has one of the oldest bell making companies in America, which I think burned down or something happened to it.
That's a whole crazy. That is a labor of love. It was started in 1832 by my great grandfather.
Wow.
And it went bankrupt in the mid 2000s. And in about 2008, and it didn't officially go bankrupt. My uncle, who was running it at the time, the wheels had come off and it was underwater. And I got a call. I lived here in Louisville. I got a call at, hey, could you lend us some money, to cover payroll? And I was like, that is not a good sign for a 175-year-old company to have to borrow money to make payroll. Bad sign. And I won't bore you with all of it other than to say the financial discipline had gone by the wayside. The company was in big trouble. I took it on as a labor of love. It's now 193 years old. It's going to be, in 7 years, it'll be 200 years old, run by the same family. I've got 21 employees there. I've never made 1 cent from this, literally not 1 penny. I've still owed money from time.
You were making more on your seed business.
Yeah, I was. Honestly, I did. I made more profit on the seed business than I have in bells. But it's a labor of love. I'm blessed to be able to afford to do it. It does cash flow itself. And I've got other wonderful employees and a cousin who is now involved and just doing great work. So, but that's been a labor of love. Other ones were ideas that I had, sometimes ideas that other people had. One thing that I would encourage your listener to do too, always make note of people you meet who are winners. And you'll know the difference. You know it if you're dating, you know it if you're in the classroom, you know it if you're out in the business world. You meet people that are winners and you meet people that are losers. You just do. And I don't mean to be pejorative, but some people you think to yourself, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with that person. They're not elevating me. I'm not going to gain much by, they may drag me down. Other people you think, man, I'd love to be in business with that person. I'd love to learn from that person. I'd like to be mentored by that person. And just keep a note of those people and then stay close to those people and find ways. I can't tell you how many of those people through the years that I've met sometimes decades ago. Some of them were people I mentored. Some were just peers. Some were people that I had worked for where I've said, I'll come back and work for that person again or work with that person or hire that person if I'm in a position to do it. And I had an opportunity to do that, on multiple occasions along the way. So, yeah, I mean, be willing to do for other people. When you're poor, you don't have a lot of option. Being a jerk if you're poor, and I was poor. I mean, like my high school yearbook picture, it's kind of embarrassing, but my high school yearbook picture, and I went to a private school. I went to a private school that was mostly a boarding school. I went there as a day student. It was about 3 miles away from where my dad worked in this little wood mill. And the school gave me a chance. They gave me about 50% of the tuition cost in financial aid. And then I worked during the summer and throughout the year to pay the other 50%. So I've been paying my own I had to pay 100% of my own education starting in 10th grade. 10th,
Wow.
11th, 12th grade, 4 years of college, grad school, just everything I've ever paid for, I had to do it myself. And but again, it makes you appreciate it. When you take that risk and you do it yourself, makes you appreciate it. But it was interesting
And
because
it makes you think through what you're going to study in college versus if your parents are paying for it. It's kind of, let's see if I can make this a 6-year degree and have fun with my friends versus when you're paying every single semester,
Yep.
you're saying, how can I study what's truly going to benefit me in the long run and switch your major to East Asian studies.
Exactly. And it's interesting because the Japanese didn't end up taking over the world. But I learned a lot, and it afforded me some interesting opportunities. I also had a ROTC scholarship, which I got to help pay for tuition in college. That's how I was able to pay my way through school. And after I got out of college, I went into the military as an active duty Army officer for 4 years. I got out as a captain, but I just decided I didn't want to make a career of it. Glad to have done it. Would do it again in a minute. Would encourage your listeners and in the parents of young people who are trying to decide what to do. There's great honor in serving our nation. I have in recent years been a little bit disappointed by what passes for leadership in our military. It's not the point of this podcast, but I'll tell you, we live in the greatest nation on earth because over the course of our history, 1.5 million Americans have died in uniform. 1.5 million have died in uniform to create this noble experiment that has sustained itself now well into the 3rd century. And it's amazing. What are we, 250 years old now? 249 years old. Think about that. 249 years ago is when this nation was birthed. But it was people even before that were doing the work necessary to make it possible. And to me, serving in our military is an honorable thing. And anyone who's even remotely inclined to do it, I would encourage them to think about it, whether you do or don't. I've never met a person, Sam, I've never met a person my age who served in the military who wishes they had not. I have met many, many people my age who wish they had. So, again, there's risk.
Yeah.
There's one thing I'll say, though. I had this conversation with somebody just this past week when I was doing a year-end review for an employee. There's a big difference between risk and change, and some people conflate them. They think, well, I changed jobs. That was a big risk. I moved. That was very risky. Was it? Maybe, maybe not. If you changed jobs from a company that was failing in a job you hated to go to a company with upside potential, with people you enjoy working with, and you did it for an increase in pay, that's not risk. Some people think that's risk. That's not risk. People for whom that is risky will never be business owners. They're never going to be people who will start their own business because they don't understand what real risk is. Real risk is when you take everything and go all in, and the possibility of ending up with nothing is very real. You mentioned the 50-50 proposition. Of all the people who start businesses in the United States, at any point in time, there's probably 25, 26, 27 million independently owned companies. And they could be everything from, Cargill to, a guy selling hot dogs on the street corner. They were all different shapes and sizes. Guess what percentage of all the companies that start ever get to 1 million in top line revenue?
Oh, 4%?
Brilliant guess. 4%.
Oh,
Literally.
really?
It's exactly.
I promise you, I didn't know that beforehand.
No, that was a good guess.
Wow.
4 out of 100
really
ever get to 1 million in top
We're going
line.
to clip that section.
And a million sounds like a lot, but there's plenty of companies that make $1 million at the top that make nothing at the bottom. You can go out of business making more than $1 million a year.
I mean, the Bell
revenue.
Company could have been making $1 million a year and not making a penny on
exactly
top of that.
It was probably making around that when it was literally failing and going under, because you're buying raw materials, brass and steel, and a lot of electricity up in Connecticut, which is where it had been founded. And it's a very expensive place to operate, and you have employees and 20-something employees. It made no sense. It was losing money. And so just because you make it doesn't mean you're going to be successful, but that's 4 out of 100. Only 1 out of 10 of those ever gets to 10 million or more in revenue. So 0.4% of all the companies that ever begin, and many fail. Companies go out of business all the time. Think of all the restaurants that you've seen come and go and come and go, among other things.
The exciting thing is to think of that is if you're saying, okay, 0.4%, make it to 10 million in revenue, there's no limit on how many things you can start.
Oh no.
And so that's the
Exactly.
fun thing.
Oh my
is
goodness.
the people who have them. That's the people who get me
Exactly
excited.
right.
Is if you listen to that and go, oh, okay, well, I got 0.4% chance of making it to this revenue, this amount that I want to make that would give me the comfortability that I feel like I want to live the American lifestyle. And then you think the mindset of, okay, I only got to start a company every 6 months for the next 10 years. And if I work harder than everybody else, I'm going to have one that's going to boom, you know?
And find people that you can partner with.
Yeah.
Find people who have a company that you can invest in. Bring something to the equation for them. Help them as an advisor. Bring capital, bring experience, whatever the case might be. Find ways that you can help other people pursue their American dream. At any given point in time, people ask me, what's your primary business? I've got like half a dozen different things. Metal fabrication, I'm making bells, making pressurized cylinders for calibrated gases, LED signs, medical technology, investment management, composite decking and railing systems, just a variety of things. Some of these were ones that I started. Others were started by friends where I just invested in them. Some from the very beginning, some later and along the way. But your point is exactly right. There's an old saying, you can't sit on two pots at the same time. Some people debate whether there's an extra letter in the word sit or not, but you can't sit on two pots at the same time. And there's some truth to that. But I've always been of the mindset that you sort of can, if you're willing to just, grind, get out there and again, try to do it all yourself. You're probably going to fail, but find other people to do it with you, and you can probably have a lot of success over time.
There have been so many good nuggets from this that I just excited for people to hear this. As I look back in I'm in real estate, and my journey was, okay, I felt like I got into real estate when I had a kid and I had a mortgage and I had a wife, and it was like, okay, I feel like I have to be successful. I didn't have the ability to say I'm going to go all in. I got to hold a little bit back here to make sure I can make a mortgage payment and pay for diapers. And I feel like the thing that I try to stress more than anything is take risk early, which you are obviously alluded to before I even brought it up. What would be your advice for somebody just finishing college saying, hey, I have an entrepreneurial mindset? What's your advice, and how does that look today?
Here's what I would say. I mean, number one, when you first get out of school, especially if you have some bills to pay off, get a job. Don't just think, well, I'm going to wait till I find the right thing to do for myself. Get a job, work for someone else. You get a lot of experience working for other people, for other companies, and doing things of that sort. So get a job, be gainfully employed, be challenging yourself and learning new things. Read a lot. You can't read too much, I'll be honest. Read a lot. And,
what books would you recommend?
Business books. I read almost all nonfiction. Read biographies and autobiographies. I did from the time I was a little kid, literally. Mm-hmm. I have books that I bought from this little library near where we lived that was open 2 hours a week. It was open. It was in a room at the town hall in this little town. It was just a room, half the size of this office, of this studio we're in. And it just had some books in there. I read most of them. It had a whole series of biographies. Mm-hmm. And starting when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, at the same time I was selling seeds, I was reading about people like, Jane Addams, people like Booker T. Washington, people like Thomas Edison, people like Henry Ford, people like Walter Chrysler, people like, George Washington Carver, just, people like Clara Barton, kids, who grew up to become people who changed the world, men, women, black, white, poor, in almost every circumstance, but not always entirely. Some of them, like a Jane Addams, grew up in some privilege, but had severe, deformities and physical limitations, but didn't let that hold her back. So people like that inspired me. I said, I want to be like these people to some degree. You ask about advice, my high school yearbook quote was by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and it was a stanza from a Psalm of Life, it was called. Great read. If your listeners should check it out. It's only about a dozen stanzas. Psalm of Life by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. One of the stanzas was my high school yearbook quote, which was, lives of all great men remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. From the time I was a kid, I thought to myself, what kind of footprints am I going to leave? And whose footprints am I following? And are the footprints that I leave behind going to be worthy for someone else to follow? And those were the kind of things that even from the time I was young, I would think about. And to that end, I would encourage people to think the same way. Take chances. What would I tell a young person? Be gainfully employed, learn, challenge yourself, take risk. I've done it time and time again. The point isn't to become wealthy, but if you have a listener who thinks, I want to be independently wealthy, I want to be able to do what I want someday, your odds of doing it working for someone else, pretty slim, unless you are an amazing quarterback or something like that, or other, point guard or something. You're probably not going to do it working for somebody else. And so to that end, take risk and start something. I left the military. I went into the investment management world. What did I know about that? I had job offers doing operational management, doing things of that sort that were actually in line with my experience, in line with what people expected me to do. But I was interested in the world of finance, and I thought, you know what? Someone gave me an opportunity, so I did it. By the time I was 28 years old, I was about your age, and I was the youngest vice president at Putnam Investments globally. They had 8,000 employees around the world. They were headquartered in Boston. I was in my late 20s. I was a vice president of this company. Like, how is that possible? It wasn't because I was smarter than all these other people. It wasn't because I was more experienced. Certainly wasn't that. One thing I was always blessed at, I interviewed well, apparently. So people gave me a chance, and I was able to grind and do it. Convince people to give you a chance. That's what I would advise people. Don't ever settle for a job. If you're going to work for someone else, don't ever settle for a job that you're already fully qualified for. Maybe your first job because you need to get one. Fine, get out of the gate.
Interesting. Say that again. Don't ever settle for a job.
Don't ever settle for a job that you're already fully qualified for. Because think about it. What are you going to learn?
That's so true.
Not much.
I've never heard that before in my life.
Not much. Always convince someone to let you jump into the deep end and trust yourself to be able to get to the shore. Trust yourself to be able to get to the edge. You will learn about yourself. You will learn about others. You will learn about life in ways that you wouldn't otherwise do it. And truth be told, if you're already fully qualified, you're almost a disservice to the person who hired you. Yeah, you're getting the job done, but you're probably not very innovative. You're just sort of settling. You're just sort of wasting your life. So always try to get a job you're not actually qualified for yet, but they're willing to let you try it, and then prove to them that it was worth taking a risk on you. I've always tried to do that. And so I did that when I went in the investment business. I did that when I left a stable job I had there to go to Putnam Investments, to do a job that I wasn't qualified for. But it turns out I was good at it. I turned out to be very good at that. And then I left that company to come to Louisville, Kentucky in 1999, the end of 98, beginning of 99, become a partner at a small investment firm here in town. And we grew that thing exponentially and sold it to a firm called Invesco. And then when I was 34 years old, I was married and had 5 daughters.
Wow.
And I decided, you know what? If I ever want to start my own investment firm, I better do it now. I was 34 years old. And so you'd mentioned about taking some mortgage money and holding it aside. I took a year and a half's worth of mortgage money. And that was pretty much it. And I set that aside so that if my pursuit didn't work, I wasn't going to lose the house because I was married, and my wife was a full-time mom, understandably, as you would imagine, with 5 kids and 5 girls, no less. So I was going to be doing something until I was 100 to pay for that. And I just took everything else and went all in and started an investment management company, a 40 Act RIA. And you mentioned at the outset how many people have become governor. I think you said 2,000 people or something in America.
That was the best I could find online.
It's probably true.
Don't
maybe it's probably something like that.
60 or so.
I guarantee you, it's more people have become a governor than have started a successful 40 Act RIA, which is registered investment advisor. A 40 Act RIA that manages more than $1 billion, say, and has some real cred and some real depth and some stability out there in the marketplace. Far few people have done that. And it's risky because it costs a lot of money to do it. You're paying people. You're paying for, data. You're paying for FactSet and Bloomberg and Thomson Financial and Reuters data. You're paying for Advent, back office software, whatever the case might be. And you're paying people, and you're paying for office space, and you're paying to go and tell your story to people. All that costs money. And I took all the nest egg that I had as a 34-year-old father of 5 girls and as the sole breadwinner in the family, and put it all in to try to make that happen. And it took a while. It really did. It took risk. And there were month after month, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8 months of not $1 of revenue, not a penny.
Wow.
2003, 2004, so 20 years ago, my gross income as a married father of 5, my gross income was $1,000 a month for the second half of 2003, nothing for the first half when I worked just for myself, and $1,000 a month for the year 2004. So $18,000 for 2 years combined gross income. And that was me just taking it out of one pocket and putting it in my other pocket. Meanwhile, I was paying other people more industry standard wages in most cases in order to get them to help me build this dream I had of building an investment management firm. And it wasn't a given. Most don't make it. And there was no guarantee that I was going to make it. But I was determined not to fail. And so I just ground, meeting after meeting, trying to convince people to jump into the pool. You talk about people being born on second and third and whatever the case might be. When you have nothing else, you are compelling in a way that, because when you know you got to be successful. I would talk to people. They'd say, well, why you? I'm like, because I'm young and hungry. And I mean like young and hungry. Like when I give you my business card, that's my number. You call that number, you get me. You don't get an assistant. You don't get somebody I punt you to. You get me.
Because I can't afford an assistant.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't tell them that. But that's exactly right. I mean, you just grind and you're hungry in a way, and people can sense it. People want to work with and for people that are hungry and are grinding. And eventually it worked. I mean, eventually I needed to get to $150 million in assets just to not lose money, which sounds like a lot, but just because you're being paid a small fraction of a percentage of what you're managing. And so anyhow, it took a while, but eventually built that up to several $1 billion in assets and then sold that to another firm. I've started, composite decking companies along the way that make composite decking and railing systems that you use, in your home. I've got, like I said, medical technology companies, other asset management related things. And
so how did you make the jump to politics from that? Because things were going well. You're
it's
saying
funny.
I'm
You
successful
keep coming
in this.
around to politics. I keep punting it.
I know, but it's so interesting because it's like,
here's why. Because I was a taxpayer. I'm a
because that was a risk. You were comfortable in successful jobs, saying I'm going to open myself up to a whole mess of things wanting to run for politics.
But think about this, Sam. I mean, it was Edmund Burke who said many years ago, what does it take for evil to prevail? It's for good men to do nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And so if good men and women sit on their hands, if non-bureaucratically minded men and women sit on their hands, if the comfortable people who have it made already sit on their hands, then evil will prevail in small and in large ways. Apathy creeps in. People get comfortable. We rot from the inside out. Every culture and every civilization has always crumbled from within. Borders move because of war. People learn new languages because of war. Capital cities may change because of war. But cultures are not destroyed by war. Civilization is not destroyed by war. Those crumble from within, intentionally or otherwise. Maybe it's an effort by a Pol Pot or somebody like that to wipe out a culture and a civilization. But often it comes through apathy and people being comfortable and sitting on their hands. So why did I jump into this arena? Because I was willing to do things that needed to be done. Whether we became a right-to-work state, got rid of prevailing wage, brought school choice, addressed the failing pension system or not, whether we did anything on those fronts or not, to just plug our ears and ignore them was not the answer. All those things needed to be discussed in this state. I did have it blessed, but you know what? People say, this is something that's worth sharing. If people haven't learned this for themselves, people say that money changes people. I have learned that that's not exactly true. Money reveals who the person really is what happens. When people become successful, if they're a jerk, they become a big jerk. If they're kind and generous, they become more kind and more generous. It reveals who they really are. And I was blessed to have been raised in an environment in a way, I'm not enamored with the money. I've been blessed to make a good living. I have. I derive far more joy in giving money away than I do in making it. And so for me, having the money, more money, what are you going to do with it? You can't take it with you. I don't want to leave a bunch of money to my kids because very few things good happen when people inherit a lot of money. It can, but not usually. And so to that end, I just want to find ways to redeploy my talents, be a good, the parable of the steward, the parable of the talents is to be a good steward of that which you've been given. And whether I've been given 1 or 2 or 5, only the master knows. I'm pretty confident I've been given either 2 or 5. I've been given more than 1. What am I doing with it? I don't want to bury it. I want to be a good steward of that. So back to the political front, I look at the state that I loved, where my children had been born. All but one of my children have been born here. 2, actually, our oldest daughter is buried here. That was killed when she was 17 years old. So I have my oldest child is buried here in Kentucky. All but one of the other 9 children have either been born here or adopted to here as their home state. My 2 children that are married were both married here. My only grandchild was born here. This is my home. This is what I care about. This is where my heart is. It's where my family is. So I cared about it. I looked around and I realized nobody is doing anything on these fronts. Nobody's talking about these things. A government of and by and for the people only works if the people take that seriously. Only works if the people step up and actually do something themselves.
Yeah.
And that includes running for office, taking yourself out of your comfort zone. Again, I've had one job in my life in the political world. For 4 years, I was a governor. Now I'm back to being a civilian again.
Talk about that. You're probably one of a very, very short list of people who've never had another government job.
Probably. But again, I would encourage qualified, competent people. If you can make a difference, if your desire is just to be a governor and go to fancy things and strut around and have a security detail stuff, don't waste your time. But if there's things you genuinely care about that you want to see get done, please, by all means, get out there. Our nation and the world has always been changed by people that were willing to sacrifice their own self-interests for the betterment of mankind at a broader level. And it doesn't mean you'll win. Doesn't mean you'll succeed. But the reality is it's important for people to get out there and do things that they think can make a difference. So for me, that was the reason. I wanted to see certain things get done in the state that I loved, in the state that is where I've decided that my family is going to be from. And certainly it's where I'm going to be. And so to that end, it's so funny, it cracks me up. I'll run into people like, "Oh, you still live in Kentucky?" Like, yeah. I mean, where else am I going to go? Like you're supposed to leave when you're not the governor or something? It's the funniest thing. I've heard that from people. I think it's because some previous governors have left, but I'm not sure why they did.
There are so many good things, and I want to respect your time. Thanks for making this work. So many good things that you've said just for me sitting here listening and hitting on the fact of if you got nothing to lose, there's nothing to lose.
No, and I'll say again, I don't know. I know this. You'll be able to edit this up, so I can. If you've got a few more minutes, we'll talk.
I got as long as you
I've
want to, and I try to not edit it unless you want to.
I have to go do a couple of employee reviews here this afternoon for one company that's here in town. But I've got a little bit of time for that. So a couple things I'd say to listeners, because they're going to be all different ages. I'm literally twice as old as you are. You're literally half my age right now. But when I was your age, I was a young guy working at Putnam Investments. Would have had no idea that I was going to ever live in Kentucky, let alone become the governor of Kentucky. You don't know where your life will go. Crazy. And I haven't been the governor for over 5 years. So think about what can happen in the next quarter century of your life. I mean, it's crazy. I was in my 40s. I became the governor of a state that I wasn't born in, didn't grow up in, didn't marry somebody from, and hadn't gone to school in. Like you said, that's not something that would normally happen. I wasn't involved in the political process. It wasn't like somebody said, okay, Bevin's the next guy.
Yeah.
I didn't kiss all of the right rings and all the right backsides to get in line. It's part of what alienated me from a lot of people, even within my own party, because they had all been kissing, backsides their whole life, waiting. And then here's this Bevin guy just cuts them off at the pass. But I wasn't doing it to try to build some political fiefdom. It's a thing that people don't even understand, is that it doesn't bother me one lick to not be in the political world. I never intended to be in it in the first place. So to get back out of there, not a problem. And I think people need to understand that if you're trying to build your fiefdom on the backs of other people's money and sweat, you're going to be disappointed a fair bit. But the point I want to make for your viewers and listeners of different ages, don't assume you have tomorrow. Don't assume you can always do whatever. When I sold Integrity Asset Management, the investment company that I alluded to earlier, I started that in the basement of my home over in Cherokee Gardens, in a little windowless basement office, smaller than this little studio, and there was no windows. I just sat down there and just ground away and did this thing with little babies crying upstairs. And
I can attest, it's hard to work in those
yeah,
scenarios.
it's hard. I finally had to move out. I really did, because, and I say this with all due respect for my wife. She was banging on the floor with a broom handle one day, and I remember she said, "Can you not hear this down there?" Which of course I could hear it. They were kids. It was just mayhem, and I felt for her because she was working harder that day than I was. But I had stuff I had to get done, because I'm like, if I don't get this done, we don't eat. So I've got to figure this out. So I ended up going and getting one of these little rental offices where you can get some space in another place. But anyway, I went and did that. But the thing I would encourage people to do is take chances, take risks. When I sold that company, I decided, you know what? I was given an opportunity to become the president of the company that had acquired my company, which was an extraordinary opportunity, that the board of the company that acquired mine asked if I would take over running the combined entity. And it was a wonderful opportunity. And I sat down with the chairman of their board and I said, listen, this is the greatest job I've ever been offered and an incredible honor, and I appreciate it. And I've really wrestled with this. But if I do it, you deserve 100% of my time and attention, which is going to come at expense of everything else in my life. And I may never be offered a job this good again, but I might. But whether I am or not, one thing I know for absolute certain that I will never have again, I will never have all my kids between the ages of 6 and 12, which is what they were at the time. And I said, I'm going to take this gap in my life, this moment of opportunity, and pour into them. And so we took our kids out of school for an entire year and drove 26,000 miles around America and visited 40-something states and visited 40-something state capitals. And just
26,000. I mean, you had to go the long way. You were doing the whole
coast.
coast?
We were doing big loops. We were going all over the place.
In an RV, or what'd you do?
Yeah, in a big van. And we'd stay in little, Hampton Inns every night. And back then, you could put everybody in one room. It was great, and get free little breakfast and off again in the morning.
They lost money on your family.
They didn't make a lot, I'll say that. But but it was all good. They were little. They just, they didn't need a ton. But it was fun. And to me, I wanted my kids to not just read about things about America and what was great about America. And this is what I encourage people. Get out there, share experiences with your family, go and do things now. Don't wait till you're older, because you may or may not ever get that opportunity again. And so, I wanted my kids to not just read about the Brown v. Board decisions from Topeka, Kansas, but literally my kids have sat in the seats in the Monroe School in Topeka, Kansas, where the first integrated classes ever were held. They've been in the, on the grassy knoll, looking over the grassy knoll in Dallas, Texas, and in the depository building.
I've stood on that X right there.
They've been
almost get hit by a car.
Exactly.
They almost put a second X
Yeah,
there.
exactly. They should put one on the sidewalk. It's over there. But the stuff like that, to be at the Lorraine Motel, to be at Acadia, to be up the Empire State Building, to be down in the Grand Canyon. I want them to see these things physically and experience them. And it was awesome. And I've even along the way too, when I was a younger man, right before I went into the military, I got out of school, I'd always wanted to see America. I never had even flown in an airplane until I was 17 years old. I won a trip through 4-H. I had animals that I would show at the fair, and then had a chance to win a trip to Washington, D.C. when I was 17 years old. It was the first time I flew in a plane. And to me, seizing opportunities anytime and every time you can is how you're going to broaden your horizons. It's how you're going to grow. It's how you're going to expand. It's how you're going to learn what your risk tolerances are or are not. I got out of school, and right before I went on active duty, I rode my bicycle 3,800 miles across the United States. I went from Astoria, Oregon to Jacksonville, Florida, and just slept on the ground every night somewhere in America. And
how many miles is that a day?
About 85. A day, and then east of Mississippi.
Did you do it with people or by yourself?
I did it with a few buddies that I graduated with, and every night we just slept on the ground somewhere, and about 115 miles east of the Mississippi a day. And it sounds like a lot, but if it's all you do all day is ride a bike, it's really not that much. You can do it in just a few hours.
80 days in a row, and
It was about 2 months. It was about 2 months, about 8 weeks actually, and only about 6 weeks of biking time. We took a
Oh
week
my
off in
gosh.
Jackson Hole with some friends that were out there working for the summer, and a few days in Yellowstone, and a couple days here and a couple days there, but mostly just pedaling every day. But I guess I say these to say, whether it's, I've jumped out of airplanes, I've bungee jumped, I've run with the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. I've traveled to 50-something countries around the world. I've worked in and lived in and traveled in these places. And I say this not because, good for me, but just I'm a kid who came from the world we described earlier. America affords people that opportunity. Title of this podcast is Risky Business. Life is risky business. Every decision you make is risky business in some measure. But you can control your own risk, take calculated risk, be informed, be thoughtful, be intentional, but go for it. Push yourself out of your comfort zone at every turn. Be willing to fail. Be smart, take a calculated risk so that if you do fail, it doesn't destroy you, but you'd be shocked at how often you come out better for having failed than if you never even took a chance. And so at each turn, whether it's with your kids, the final thing I'll say that has nothing to do with business per se, serve other people. And if you're a parent and you're listening to this, one of the greatest gifts you can give your children, one of the greatest gifts you can give them at any age is to serve other people with them. Don't just send them on mission trips or doing service projects or whatever the case might be. Do it with them. Do it when you have nothing to gain from the people that you're serving. There's 0% chance you're ever going to get anything back out of it other than the satisfaction of having done for other people. It's the greatest gift, and you will get so much from it. And so to me, to be successful in business, to be successful in life, you got to be willing to fail. Be kind, serve other people, keep a positive balance in the favor bank. Just always do for other people. If you see somebody stranded on the side of the road, I know we live in a crazy world, but if you see a car broken down and then half a mile later you see a single person walking toward an exit that's still 2 miles to go, pull over and give that person a ride. It doesn't always work out. But use some judgment. My point is, find ways to be kind to people and help people out, and the world will open up extraordinary opportunities.
Oh, I can't thank you enough. I can't wait to watch this back and just take notes, because you've said so many good things that I feel like just the people that I know listen to this will be extremely challenged by. I've been challenged by. So thank you for your time. Thanks for your love for our state. Thanks for your love for entrepreneurship and young people and wanting to challenge us. And thanks for taking time to invest in me and challenge me and sit down with me. So thank you, sir.
Welcome. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.